hand him a chair. It's time for class, okay? Good boy. Good boy. Can I have my chair? Okay, so for the next couple of weeks in our Red Letter series, we're going to be looking, Brad and I, at two of the last things that Jesus said after his resurrection. He said this, I want you to wait. I want you to stay in the city until I come. And he said, go. And next week, Brad is going to be talking about that next part, the Great Commission, go into all the world. But I really wanted to take some time and focus on the importance of what Jesus said to his disciples before they went. And they had to be so excited, man. Something that the Jews had waited for, and really the world had been waiting for over a millennia, the coming Messiah. And now especially that he has come and that he's been raised from the dead, they had something to say. Going was not simply obedience to a command. It was something that they felt the burdened. They were excited about this opportunity to go and to let people know earth-shattering, life-changing news. But before they went, Jesus said this, I want you to wait. I want you to stay in the city. I just want to read from, this is Luke 24. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high. In John 14, he had said, I'm going away and I'm coming back to you. In Acts 1:4, on one occasion while he was eating with them, he gave them this command, don't leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about. I think it's really interesting that there's an interim period here at all, a period in which the disciples would have to remain in Jerusalem, stay in the city, wait, Jesus says, until you're clothed with power from on high. Imagine how excited they would have been, how much they were anticipating just going. They didn't go into all the world and preach the gospel simply because Jesus told them to, simply because it was a command. It was a burden they felt. Generations and generations, over a millennia, they have been waiting for this Messiah. The world has been waiting for this Messiah. And now more than that, he's been raised from the dead. They have something to say, and they can't wait to go and to tell people. But Jesus says, I want you to wait. I want you to be patient until you're clothed with power from on high. And so they remain in the city of Jerusalem. And there's such an interesting parallel that is developing here. And I want to kind of begin with that. So I'm going to take you back to Moses. And this is the story of the Exodus from Israel. In Exodus 12, we're told that the Lord kept vigil the night of the Exodus. He kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. And so all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for generations to come on that night of Passover. So the Lord kept vigil. He kept watch over them, stayed up, made sure that they were protected and made safe. Now that's going to be important later. He watched over them. And then they were led out of Egypt. And the Lord brought them through the Red Sea. He brought them to Mount Sinai. And there Moses said to the people, I want you to wait here for us until we come back to you. And then Moses ascends into the cloud. He disappears into the cloud after having told the people to wait for his return. And then he comes back down on Pentecost. He comes back down with the law. And 3,000 people die that day. Now, what's so interesting in this parallel account in the New Testament, Jesus and the disciples, they're in Gethsemane. And they're keeping vigil, right? They're praying. They're doing so because of what Exodus 12 said, because in commemoration of the Lord keeping vigil that night, for generations and generations, the people would keep vigil on that night. So here's Jesus with his disciples, literally God in the flesh, once again, keeping vigil, keeping watch on the night of the Passover. So Jesus kept vigil on the same night that the Lord kept vigil in the Old Testament. And that's why you can see the passion in his voice as he speaks to his disciples. And he says, can you not just stay awake with me for 1 hour? I need you to hold vigil. I need you to keep vigil with me. Keep watch with me. There's so much depth to what's happening here. It's corresponding to the Exodus still. And then this Jesus is crucified. He's sacrificed on the cross, corresponding to this lamb who was sacrificed in the Exodus, whose blood was spread on the doorpost. And just as Moses led the people to Sinai, and before disappearing into the clouds, going up into the clouds, ascending into the clouds, he told the people, I need you to wait here. I want you to wait here. I'm coming back to you. And when he comes back, 3,000 people die that day. We call it Pentecost. And in celebration and commemoration of that event, Jesus comes back. The Spirit comes back. The Spirit that he promised comes back. And 3,000 people are baptized into Christ. There is so much depth to this parallel. I want to just bring us back to what he said in the book of John. This is chapter 14, verses 16 through 21. I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. These verses can seem confusing in John 14 because at first Jesus says, I'm going to send you a helper. I'm going to send you a counselor. But then he says, in the same context, I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. And then he reiterates it twice. He says, and that day you will realize that I am in you. And again, he says, I am going away and I am coming back to you. And so the Spirit that he was going to send was his very Spirit. And you see that in Paul's writings. You see it all over the New Testament. Here's some examples. Romans 8, 9 through 10. If anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he does not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, your body's dead because of sin. In Acts 16, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. In Philippians 1:19, I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. The gospel of the Old Testament essentially is this: God with his people. Moses begging for God's presence to be with the people. David talking about the comfort that he has, speaking of God as a shelter in a storm, speaking of God as his rock. If God is with me, no one can stand against me. You see this theme in Jeremiah. You see it in the Psalms. You see it throughout the Old Testament. God with his people. His people walking with him. And now in the New Testament, it's essentially the same thing. God's presence going before us. God's presence going in us. God with us. And you see that theme carried out in the book of Acts. It's not really about the works or the acts of the apostles. It's more about the working and the acts of the Holy Spirit. And that is brought out. That's a central theme of the book of Acts. Going in the Holy Spirit, the Spirit closing doors, the Spirit opening doors, the Spirit carrying his people, guarding his people, protecting his people, and the power of the Spirit in us to conquer sin, to guide us away from our old way of thinking, the Spirit that teaches us to say no to ungodly passions and desires. That is the Spirit that Jesus says is my Spirit in you, leading you. We are still, just as the disciples were walking and moving in the steps of Christ. And he is very much right here with us. He is present. He is in us. And that is really the story, the gospel of the New Testament. So when the disciples were asked to stay and to wait in Jerusalem for his return, there is a corresponding element here to Moses coming down from the mountain and coming and bringing the law. But whereas 3,000 people were killed that day, 3,000 people are baptized into Christ. And you see the Spirit of life that flows through us, that brings life to others through us, that carries us along, that speaks when we don't know what to say. Just consider how Peter and Paul spoke of this Spirit. This is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:10. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them. Speaking of the other disciples, and then he says, but it wasn't it wasn't me, but the grace of God that was in me. In Philippians 2:13, it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. Peter spoke of it in this way in 1 Peter and 2 Peter 1:21. Prophecy never had its origin in the will of man, but men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit isn't to be understood as a mysterious force that has no personality and is something distinct from God. But God, in the flesh, came to us as Jesus Christ. And when Jesus Christ promised the return of the Holy Spirit, his language in John 14, I think is very revealing. I'm going to send you a helper. I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. I am present with you. I will be present in you. These early disciples were so dependent on this Spirit. This small sect of 120 Christians in Jerusalem that would have utterly failed. They had no hope. There's no way they could have carried out this mission. There's no way the church could have ever even taken root. But they waited in Jerusalem. They stayed until they were clothed with this power from on high. God's presence in them, with them, and through them. And the book of Acts in the New Testament is really about that driving force, the power of the church, not our intellect, not our ability to do this on our own, not our ability to make wise decisions as though we're running this as a business and the Holy Spirit is something for us to lean back, fall back on. No, the Holy Spirit was the driving force and needs to be the driving force in the church today. Depending on him, waiting on him, knowing what it is to be carried along by that Spirit today. The church always needs to hear these words, stay and wait for me. In Isaiah 40, it says this, those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like an eagle. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. That is the power that Christ invested in us, that he filled his church with, his very presence, God with us. I pray that you'll find a way, I pray that we together in prayer will find a way to once again hear these words that the disciples heard. Stay and wait. Trust in me first. Be clothed with power from on high, and then go forth in that power. I think all too often we do forget that in us, that we are not good businessmen trying to grow a healthy business. We don't have the strength. We don't have the stamina. We don't have the intellect or the acumen to carry out this mission. We are utterly dependent on his presence, his Spirit in us and with us. And I pray that God would bless you with just another reminder to wait on him, to put your hope in him, to put your trust in him completely. May God bless you, and may God bless us with his presence.